Back in my early 20s, I worked for a very well-known charity who provided care for ex-servicemen and women. I had no previous care experience and was warned that on night shift, things would happen. Being a believer in the paranormal, I feel helped. But this being said, I can't explain some of the things I experienced. After a few months of working there, we did a rotation on night shift, which I had never done before. So the way the unit was set, that we could see each other over each other's shoulders from being sat in front of the nursing station. To my right was the open plan kitchen dining area that led into a corridor of 10 rooms. There was 3 of us sat at this table, no residents were up, and all of a sudden the kitchen area went from complete darkness to bathed in light. I looked at my colleagues who didn't even react to this and kept going with the various tasks. Once I brought up the subject, they said, "Forgot to mention thing like that happened. This building was less than 20 years old," which of course creeped me out. Soon after, a resident, whom I had a good relationship, passed away. It's worth saying now, this person used an electric wheelchair and was bad at controlling it. When my nights ended and when I was back on days, I walked past his room and was carrying out a task with his room door in my peripheral vision. I saw a black figure, in the same size and shape as he would have been, whiz out of the room, in the same way he would have, and vanish into the same area of wall he would normally have hit. Yet again, I can't debunk this. Another time, I had a colleague go into the room adjacent to me, thinking I had just walked in, which was strange as they knew what room I was in. I then went into the room behind them and they got the fright of their life and asked how I got there, as they had followed me in. Yet again, the resident who was in that room had passed away. My father grew up in the mountain hills of Jalisco, Mexico. During his childhood, they grew up in a small adobe house and had to help with work to bring money or food home. One night after making it home from working with my grandfather, he went to sleep. He was awakened by what he recalls just a small person that asked him to put on his shoes and follow him. He had something to give him, but they had to go on a walk to where it was. My father said he put his shoes and followed into the trees past a field, small creek, and arrived to a tree. This little person points at the foot of the tree, tells my father the treasure is there, and it's for him. "Where?" my father replies. "In the ground. I have treasure I would like you to have." He awoke on his bed mat at home in the morning. Confused, he looks over and notices his shoes with some mud. He ends up telling one of his brothers what had happened and that they should go over and dig that treasure out. They arrive to the location. The tree stood there just like in my father's dream. They begin to dig, and after a couple hours they are tired and giving up. The dirt is hard, and they have digged about 1.5 meters down, maybe a little more. They were around the age of 9 and not that tall, so for them the hole looked deep. They headed home disappointed. Around a year passes, and a rancher nearby all of a sudden has become really wealthy. No one around knows from where or how he came into this, as he was poor and worked just as everyone around the area. People started telling their own versions of how they believed he came to this amount of money. And one of them mentioned he came across a treasure. My father, hearing this, remembers his treasure he never dug up and heads over as soon as he gets a chance. To my father's surprise, the hole looked like it had been digged not too long ago, maybe 0.5 meter or more. If they would have just dug a little bit more down, that treasure would have all been theirs. While growing up in my late teens, around 9th grade, our house had been bought out by the school districts for their expansion of the schools, new football field and gym. I didn't go to that school, and even though I lived a block away, I was already in a enrolled in a high school and my parents would rather just drive me there than deal with the paperwork, and I didn't really feel like switching schools. We moved to a house built in 1959, somewhat updated on the inside, almost an acre in land, but was a mountain. It was still about 13 minutes away from my high school. We were all excited. For the first time, we all had our own room. It was the second night there. I turned off the lights in my room and everyone else goes off to sleep as well. I'm laying in bed, looking up at the ceiling, and all of a sudden, I feel my sheets start to pull away from me. I grab a hold of the sheets and pull them back, but there's something holding them down. I don't see anything at the end of my bed, and my sheets keep pulling away, and I pull, and all of a sudden, I almost hit myself in the face. They had let go. I sit right up on my bed and look around and try and make anything in the darkness of the room. My light switch was right at the end of my bed, and I was not about to go that way, so I just decided to sleep it off. The next morning, out in the hallway, my brother is telling my mom that something had pulled his sheets during the night, pulled them halfway to his waist and stopped. I jump into the conversation and my story and mention to my brother that maybe since they couldn't with my sheets, they went for his. We leave it at that and have no other incidents until one night my brother says he was falling asleep when he got fully awakened by someone grabbing him by the balls. He mentions he couldn't scream and the pain was making him want to cry. After what felt for an eternity, they released him and he stays there in bed, in pain. A couple days later, he mentions he was laying in bed when he noticed the ceiling starting to move. He was being dragged off his bed by the sheets and he was laying on top of. He felt his feet start to go off the bed as he's being pulled. He got up as quickly as he could and turned the lights on to nothing in his room. I believe to be about a month later, one night I got a cold shiver that awakens me. I'm not covered. I look around and then notice my little sister had gone into bed with me and had taken all the covers for herself. I stand on my knees on bed and unroll her and fix the sheets. As I hang the sheets behind me to lay down, I glance at my door and even in the darkness of the night, I could make out a silhouette of a man wearing what I call a chuko hat standing there. I freeze, don't know what to think of the situation, so I just turn and lay down, covering my sister and myself and closed my eyes. Never saw that guy again, but we did have a girl that stayed over to sleep over with my sister, mentioned she saw someone at their door at night. Nothing after that. This house came to be where I experienced 90% of all my ghost experiences as I grew. This happened when I first moved out of my parents' house and was attending college. A friend of mine and myself rented a 2-bedroom section of a house. The bottom floor had 2 sections for people to rent out. We were on the top floor of the house. My roommate was in a band at the time, and he had left town to go play somewhere with his band. I was sitting in the living room by myself on a Friday night at about 8 p.m. I'm watching It's Always Sunny, with the kitchen table out of sight to my left. I hear the door to get in open, and I thought my roommate had come back for some reason. But a minute or so passes, and I realise the door never closed. I walk to the door to see it open, so naturally I close it. It was winter in the Midwest. I checked for my roommate and didn't find him, so I shrugged it off. About an hour later, I'm back on the couch and I hear a chair from the kitchen slide out from under the table. I look over and see the empty chair facing me. I go check the kitchen and the bathroom, and again there was nobody. A week or 2 later, I went home to visit my parents and brother for the weekend. My roommate told me he had the front door open on him randomly. He thought it was weird, but didn't think much of it. Until I told him what happened to me. We thought of many ways the door could open itself: wind, snow, air pressure. But we could not think of anything that would make the chair slide out. After we had this conversation, periodically we would hear the door open. We decided that our place had a ghost. We named him Kramer, after Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld. It seemed appropriate, since he always walked in without knocking randomly. Nothing bad ever happened, just a slightly higher heating bill from the open door. There's been a few encounters I've experienced. Usually on weekends, I stay up late gaming with my friends. I always go downstairs fairly often to get snacks and drinks. One night when I was going, I heard the TV was on and heard what sounded like my mom talking to people. When I got to the living room, everything was off besides my fish tank light. I just brushed it off, thinking I was tired or something. The next happened a few weeks later. I was getting ready to go to sleep, and as I was turning my light off, I heard my bird hissing. He does that when he's scared, and he doesn't hiss at me. I thought it was because I was waving the blanket, but when I got in bed, he just kept looking in the corner, behind my door and hissing. This went on for about an hour until he finally stopped. And the latest thing happened yesterday. My bird was chilling on my table, and he was moving his head around the way he would when I would be petting him. The thing is, I was 10 feet away from him. His feathers were moving, his fingers were running through them. A few minutes after that, my disc came out of my Xbox randomly. I take it out and put it next to the Xbox, only to find it back in, after coming back from the shower. Just this year, something strange happened to my mum. So I decided to tell you guys the story, and you can let me know what you think. She was in Melbourne with my dad on holidays, and they decided to go to the old Abbotsford Convent, which is now an arts, educational and cultural hub. They were wandering the grounds, when out of the corner of my mum's eye, she saw movement in the field nearby. She turned and saw a young blonde-haired girl in a white dress with a bonnet on her head. She was just standing there, stock still staring at her. They made eye contact for a few seconds, but when my mum blinked, the girl just vanished. It didn't really register with her till she was a few steps forward. Frowning in confusion, she backed up and poked her head around the building once again. Lowering her sunglasses, she searched the area for the girl, but she was gone. My mum was confused. The girl couldn't have gone far. Only a few seconds had passed, but there was no one there. With wide eyes, she caught up to my dad and told him that she had seen a young girl, but she had disappeared. They both walked back and had a look around and confirmed that the area was empty. Still shocked, my mum just passed it off as a trick of the light, until they entered an area where they learned the convent had provided refuge and rehabilitation for young women who had somehow acted outside the normal behaviour expected of them. They earned their keep through unremitting servitude to the 8 Magdalene commercial laundries, run by the Good Shepherd sisters. This was run from 1863 to 1971. My dad showed my mum a picture of the girls, and it sent a shiver down her spine as it showed that they were wearing identical clothes to that girl that she had glimpsed earlier. Later, my parents learned that there used to be a cemetery on the grounds where people who died at the convent were buried. In my life, I've only had a couple of strange experiences, so I thought I'd write one down and let you guys read it. The incident occurred when I was around 3 years old. As with being that young, I don't remember much from the time, except for one vivid memory. My family had not long ago moved into a rental property in the suburbs of Melbourne. It was a nice enough house, small but cosy, perfect for a young family. It began on a day during winter when darkness came early, wherein I was sitting on the couch in the living room, watching a kids show that I can't remember. I was kind of zoning out when the eerie feeling of being watched flowed over me. a tingle at the back of my neck that made me stiffen and look around in confusion. Everything was normal. I heard my parents cooking dinner in the kitchen, and my older sister was playing on the ground nearby. I physically felt eyes boring into the back of my head, so following my instincts, I turned and looked out the window. The first thing I noticed was that the curtains were opened, even though it was pitch black outside, and my mum always closed them when the sun went down. Focusing on what's beyond the glass, my eyes searched the whole darkened front yard. A shiver ran down my spine, because somehow I knew there was something out there. I froze, and fear shot through to my very core when the blackness moved and I saw a shape amid the shadows. There was a tall, dark figure lurking under the large tree that stood in the middle of the lawn. The thing looked humanoid, but I couldn't see any detail. It was just jet black, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on it when I looked right at it. I couldn't see its face, but I somehow knew it was looking right at me. I had the feeling that whatever it was, it didn't have good intentions. All I remember is thinking bad when I saw it. What was even stranger was that the pale glow from the streetlights left the yard in a shadow, but the dark figure cast no shadow. It felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. I stood terrified, staring at this thing. My heart was thundering in my chest. I felt like a predator being stalked by its prey. Mercifully, my mum's voice broke through my panic as she called us to dinner. Snapping my eyes away from the shadow, I glanced over my shoulder to where my mum was setting the plates on the table. I sighed in the relief at the normalcy. I didn't want to look back, but I just had to know if it was still there. So I plucked up my courage and I turned back to the window. My eyes widened in shock, but when I saw that figure was gone, like it was never there. When I saw that it was gone, and I did what any 3-year-old would do, shrug it off and eat my dinner. I honestly thought this was a dream until I was chatting with my mum and asked her if there used to be a tree in the front yard of our old house and a grey chair in the lounge room. When she told me there was, I was freaked out and told her what I remembered. There were too many similarities to the house, and it's weird that I would remember so much about that incident from being that young. So I figured it had to be a memory. My entire life, I've been blessed with a miraculous gift. I know when someone is going to die. As a child, I assumed that shadows were dark in the day and white at night. But then one particular evening, I saw a man whose shadow blinked black and white brightly, like lightning strikes, a strobe light in motion. This man didn't die. He mugged and stabbed an old woman right before my eyes. She died at the scenes. And the man ran off. Now I know what a flashing shadow means. Murderer. After 22 years and hundreds of thousands of experiences, I've learned 2 things. The white aura, which glows bright as the sun, but doesn't blind, signifies that one is healthy and safe. The dark shadows walk about as silhouettes of people, arms clasped behind their backs, eerily tiptoeing, just waiting for that person to die. Children are brightest, elderly people darkest, middle-aged people, and in between, grey. So you could imagine how harrowing it feels to see a newborn baby at the hospital being looked down upon by a black figure. I'm writing this now because I'm just waiting to hear it. My new girlfriend and I went to dinner. She doesn't know about my gift, so she was understandably incensed when, upon stepping into the restaurant for less than a minute, I pulled her away. We had to go, and I'd explain later. I was expecting the usual. Tables of people with multicoloured shadows across the mortality spectrum, aglow, brimming with positive laughter and mirth. But this time, the second we walked in, I was confronted by a terror I've only seen in my worst nightmares. Everyone's shadow was black, even the children. I gripped her hand tightly and pulled her out as fast as I could, before I noticed that same horrific flashing shadow following a man with a backpack entering the business. just as we got into the car. I peeled out so fast I nearly caused an accident. Unfortunately, now I'm a frog in a petri dish, trapped in bumper-to-bumper traffic. I called the police. A helicopter has just passed over. We're on the overpass directly over the restaurant. My girlfriend has always had a bright aura. All of a sudden, it's black. I don't know what mine is, but maybe we should run. It's obvious the bomb squad. There's an old abandoned hospital just a few blocks behind my house. More like the skeleton of a hospital. You've got to follow a dirt trail for a ways, and there it is, surrounded by tree growth, decorated in decades of vines. An elderly, discarded vessel, covered in varicose veins, living in isolation, listening to falling acorns for generations, probably going crazy of boredom. They say the building is alive, that it used to house victims of tuberculosis after the war, that it's haunted and turns people insane. My friends dared me to do it. There's a rumour the building can't be demolished, which is why it still stands in such an odd place, like the middle of the woods. I would be the one who triumphed, however, so the bet was that I would run to the top floor, the 9th floor from the bottom, take a picture of the floor number, wave out the window, and run back down. Simple enough. I'd already had the plan: break in, run up as fast as I could without looking, shine it, and run back out. So at midnight, we arrived, and I crawled through a slide-open window. Eerily, the windows were covered in steel bars like a prison. Unsettling enough. I entered the building and crossed through a room, turning a corner and finding a door leading to a staircase. I pushed through it and began running up. Floor 1, not so bad. 2 more sets, floor 2, floor 3, up 1 more, 5. Now I'm coasting. 6, 7, 8, 9. I dashed through the door, ran to the window, shined my light and waved as my friends waved back. Conquered. It was all over. Over, but not the way I imagined. Because I ran down a flight, floor 9. I must have missed something. Down another flight, floor 9. Sprinted down 2 more, 9, 9. Hopped and jumped down 5 more, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. Back up, 9. I tried to burst through a door. Maybe I can jump out of a window. There are no doors. Hyperventilation, sweat, palpitations, and abject terror, but nothing else. I'm in a chasm that won't end. Perhaps this is reality. My phone isn't losing charge, and I'm able to post my reality on the internet as I am now, because what else would I do? That was, until I met the other girl. All curled up in a ball, face buried in her knees on a platform between stairs, maybe 40 floors below. Dark-haired young Asian girl. I tapped her shoulder, and I recoiled when I saw her face. She was crying, and looked like she hadn't slept before. I asked her what we were supposed to do to keep our sanity here. She looked up at me, opened her mouth like she was about to say something genuine, and then her entire presence shifted when her frown upturned into a maddening glee, and she just started to laugh uncontrollably. She got up and began to approach me, but I ran. They say insanity is repeating something, expecting a different result. However, now I know sanity has no definition. My town has seen a sudden, unexpected wave of disappearances, without any rhyme or reason. The elderly, children, and everything in between. No consistency, not even in terms of race. Usually kidnappers or murderers don't veer from one particular ethnic or age category, but this, it was like the earth was just opening up and swallowing people at random. Once the number hit 28, it began to receive national media attention. I could only be glad it wasn't me. To forget about it all for one night, I decided to take my girlfriend out on a date for dinner at a new hibachi restaurant and movie. I hadn't heard anything good or bad about the place, but it was right in the epicenter of the bustling party scene in our town, and the theatre had just lifted its COVID restrictions. When we entered the restaurant, we were both taken back a bit. The interior was quite small compared to the enormity of the building it was attached to, but I'd heard they were putting in a Dave and Buster's somewhere, and I assumed it was going to be inside the same piece of real estate. The parking lot was packed, and the only space we could find was a good 3 blocks away. With all of the disappearances, I can't say the long walk in darkness was the most comfortable feeling, so I pulled her close and kept my eyes peeled for anyone who looked like a psychopath. My heart skipped a few beats when we passed a lone man walking by in all black with a beanie and his head down, but nevertheless, we made it. I never stopped looking over my shoulder. For all the vehicles in the parking lot, the restaurant was barely at half capacity. We got a table immediately. Amidst the wafting sense of sushi and seasoning was an unusually pungent smell of what seemed like bleach and sanitizer. But in COVID, it made sense. Safer than sorry, you know? We exchanged innocuous banter and gossip when I noticed that only one waitress was working all the tables. Something else a bit disconcerting was noticing people constantly getting out of their seats and running to the bathroom. But I figured I was too much in my own head, so I focused on my girlfriend. Food was served quickly. The first thing I noticed was that the food was extremely over-seasoned. We both had to send our dinners back. The waitress apologized and practically sprinted back into the kitchen. "I'm sorry for that, guys," she said with humility as she placed our new sizzling plates in front of us. It tasted exactly the same. In order to avoid being the embarrassment of being those customers, we decided to just eat it, tip light, if at all, and never come back. If only. Almost in unison, before even finishing a third of our meals, we both instantly began to get nauseous. "Fucking food poisoning," I shouted in anger. My stomach began to twist and turn as we each remarked to the other, "You're really getting pale," simultaneously. I don't know what the fuck disease was in this food, but I'd never experienced a bout of food poisoning that came on this quickly. We each shot each other a glance that read, "I really have to go to the bathroom." And just as I watched her spit up a puddle of bile into her plate, we both got up and sped quickly down to the restrooms. "See you in a few," I said, as she shot me an acknowledgement that said, "I understand," before pushing open the doors to the men's and ladies' room. What was strange and a bit unsettling was that upon entry through the men's room door, I found myself staring down a long, dimly lit corridor leading to yet another door. Not only that, but I nearly slipped on something really slimy. However, I didn't stop to look at it, as I was ready to burst at both ends. "I'm not paying this bill," I screamed in my head. I passed through the second floor, now faced with yet another fucking hallway and door. This one like heavy steel, and even more disquieting, there was a short Asian man in a dark suit standing next to it. He looked very stoic, and still as I approached. Finally, I reached him. "Allow me," he murmured, with a curious smirk, as he pulled out an old-fashioned skeleton key and shoved it briskly into a heavy gold lock. "Fuck man, hurry up, before I make him..." And as the door opened and I sped past him, I halted immediately, in a moment of abject horror. Under rows and rows of glistening, iridescent tube lights, I was staring down something I couldn't even imagine in my worst nightmares. Rows and rows of crud-covered toilets. Even worse, men, clothes ripped off, knelt down on their knees, arms hugging the bowl, wrists locked around them with handcuffs, looking up at me with regret and desperation in their eyes, while continuously heaving and vomiting. I scanned the room quickly before spitting up stomach acid all over my feet. The rows of toilets stretched the entire distance of a mall-sized building, up and down what would have to be several city blocks. And of these people, just briefly, I find myself staring into the tortured eyes of several men and children, ones who'd gone missing. The smell of feces, puke, and bleach inadvertently caused me to projectile vomit all over a man with his head buried in a toilet. I couldn't find my tongue to apologize. An insurmountable dread began to fill my veins like a suicide shot of adrenaline. I began hyperventilating, cusp of a crippling panic attack. The tiled floors were covered in splotches of multicolored goo as another skinnier man in a mask casually mopped the floors. I wasn't about to become a casualty of cruelty. I've seen the way they do it over there, impaling dolphins around with laughter, beating dogs hung by their necks, brutalizing them further by immolating them while alive. The annual Chinese dog slaughter, a celebration of cruelty to 10,000 innocent dogs that could be your pet. Now they've brought it over here and doing it to us. Before I could turn to run back out, I watched in shock as the heavy door slammed shut behind me, the clicking of the lock echoing in my ears, my immutable last rites. Before I knew it, I was put into a suffocation hold by an enormous man in a gas mask and dragged squealing like a girl while I thrashed around as the words number 47 emanated in a deep masculine voice through some sort of large speaker system, echoing off the walls of a morbid prison, intertwined with the ghastly sounds of begging and moaning, reduced to their most raw form. Unavoidable, primal fear, unending, a vomitorium of grown men weeping, some screaming for their mothers. "Mommy!" cried a grown man of formidable size, trying desperately to rip the toilet out of the floor. "Open," said the man in the mask. The big guy refused, before his nose was pinched and mouth forced open, as what looked like a rotten piece of squid was dropped into his mouth. Could have been a bloody band-aid. The little children shrieking like injured puppies as streaks of red ran down their chests from internal hemorrhaging. They have nothing left to throw up but blood. And then I was dropped directly in front of a toilet with the number 47 etched in black marker on the side. I had my clothes cut off me with a retractable blade, and, with what felt like the muzzle of a gun pressed against my temple, I heard those inevitable words, "Hug the toilet." As I looked to the ceiling with tears running down my cheeks and vomit dripping from my chin, I could only expel the words, "God help me," as the nightmarish vision of my frail, supple girlfriend crying out for me to save her while spewing up her own intestines flashed in my mind. Sisters, wives, brothers, children, all crying out for a God turning blind. And then I left an arm inside around my shoulder just for a brief moment, before my purveyor of doom whispered in my ear, muffled through his foreboding gas mask, the words, "God is not here." And then the lights went out, followed by a cacophony of endless, tormented screams. I'll never sleep again.